Great. Well, like Tessa said, I'm Ethan Lockwood, Project Manager with the Water Trust. I'll be talking about our Teanaway River Trust Water Rights Acquisition Program. This may be familiar to some of you. We put in a similar proposal, I think that was back in 2020, for this type of work. At that time, we had one sort of water acquisition that there were a lot of questions about that's been removed from this program request. Other sort of reason that previous application wasn't selected for funding was just sort of the ripeness of having willing landowners. So I'll talk about where we are with that and why we're sort of reapplying at this point. But just for a reminder, the Teanaway River Basin is one of the priority steelhead recovery planning areas. Both low flow and high water temperatures are limiting factors, both from the ESA recovery plan and from the Yakima Steelhead Recovery Plan. Specifically, the 2020 Yakima Basin's Recovery Boards, the Focus Project List, Focus Action number 16, called that projects resulting in permanent and quantifiable increases in stream flows in the Teanaway forks through the acquisition of water rights. So we fit nicely into that bucket. And I think most everyone is fairly familiar. The Teanaway River Basin sort of plays an outsized role if you look at sort of its area, its fish recovery impacts. There's been estimates that the upper Yakima Basin was 30 to 40% of returning adult steelhead spawners historically. So really important both for the steelhead. There's of course the juvenile spring Chinook acclimation site on the North Fork Teanaway. Coho were extirpated from the Yakima Basin, but we've seen limited numbers of them returning and even a little bit of spawning. And then of course on the bull trout side, haven't seen really much evidence of bull trout recently. Know they used to be there, but anything that sort of resets the stage for them to return would be great. And so specifically on the flow side, the Water Trust has set this goal of trying to protect 12 CFS at river mile 0.55. That's a critical riffle in the Teanaway River that Department of Wildlife identified for us. And 12 CFS is sufficient for small salmonoid passage, allowing fish to move in and out of the Teanaway River system. And that's sort of become the baseline that we're chasing. Of course, there's also been PF sim models run on the Teanaway, and we see that there's an increasing amount of habitat availability, wetted usable area for juvenile coho, rainbow trout, steelhead, and spring chinook, both during drought conditions and during non-drought conditions from increasing stream flows in the current areas. And looking sort of specifically at those low flow conditions in the Teanaway, we know that the annual late summer low flow continues to inhibit the recovery of both of our salmon and resident fish populations. Looking at sort of that more recent flow data over roughly the past 15 years, about half of the years we see flows dropping below 10 CFS during the late summer. And in some of those really bad drought years, we've seen flows going as low as about 5.5 CFS. And we know that irrigation withdrawals in that lower about 11 miles where we have the predominant amount of irrigation and out of stream water use is a contributor to the already low base flow conditions. Like Tessa mentioned, looking down, what is climate change going to do for this system with a snowpack dependent system that's moving, away from snow and increasingly towards rain. We're looking at a flashier system with longer low and worse low flow conditions than sort of reference conditions. So anything we can do to sort of mitigate against that. And then just kind of quickly looking here, so that graph on the left is down at the bottom of the Teanaway system in 2015. So that was sort of a wake up year for flow conditions. and see how low and how far below sort of that target of 12 CFS the river is dropping in that sort of July, August time period. And then on the right is just to say that the Trust has been working in the Teanaway River Basin for over 20 years. We've had a lot of success in that basin. That graph on the right just shows as you kind of come down in river miles, so moving from river mile down to the confluence at river mile 0, how do the acquisitions that the Water Trust has already implemented stack up? Have just under about 4 CFS of permanent protected flow at the confluence. So that's sort of working towards that target of 12 CFS. We've taken some steps towards that goal. And how has our sort of approach to this worked? We've been using what we're calling this programmatic water rights acquisition strategy. On the left is just sort of a graph that is showing, we looked at sort of all the water transactions in the Yakima Basin and looked at sort of the relationship between prices paid and the priority. How reliable is that water right? How often is it curtailed or entirely unavailable? And we sort of developed this sliding price scale then that says, well, the more reliable, the more senior the water right is, the more we'll pay for that, and prorating the cost as the priority date decreases of those water rights. I think one thing I always like to mention is that just because it's not the most senior water right doesn't mean that there's not value in acquiring that water right. These systems where if you look at those PAB-SIM curves in the wetted usable area, where even in non-drought conditions, we're still pretty low down on that curve, meaning adding water, even if that water might not be available in a really bad drought year, in the majority of years, we're still getting a good amount of habitat benefit from putting that water back in stream. And then just sort of that reminder that what you think about as available water sort of really changed in 2015 when we saw curtailment of water rights down to those only to 1886. They were the only remaining water users allowed to take water on the Yakima or on the Teanaway. The sort of goal of this acquisition program is to sort of leverage 20 years of trust, relationships, and work in the basin. Prior towards launching just this permanent acquisition program, the Water Trust had been running numerous short-term and long-term leases and other types of non-permanent transactions, especially as water rights have been divided and ownership divided in the Teanaway Basin. It becomes increasingly sort of costly on the administrative side to manage those transactions that are relatively small. And that was part of the incentive to launch this permanent acquisition program, is to transition those existing relations and short-term transactions into permanent flow transactions. We've also used it to sort of provide that water right pricing stability and assurance that we can go to landowners in the Teanaway. We have sort of an existing valuation and we have an existing way to talk to them about the value of the water. And having this permanent acquisition program means that they know what's on the table and we know what we're offering to them. So 2023, sort of what are we looking at as far as the water rights we'd like to work with? Currently sort of have 8 opportunities, 8 landowners that we have varying levels of contact with that are the targets right now. In total, that's about 3.8 CFS of diverted water or 2 CFS of consumptive water that would be added in. We're working with them to secure as many landowner acknowledgement forms as possible. Landowner willingness remains sort of the largest hurdle to any of these sort of water right acquisition programs. And we would anticipate that we'll be working really hard over the coming months to see which landowners we really think have a willingness to participate and would pare back our ask commensurate with actually the higher confidence we have in what transactions actually are feasible in the next year or two. We also have significant cost share with the National Fish and Wildlife's Columbia Basin Water Transaction Program. We generally look for about 50% of funding for water acquisitions from them and 50% from another program such as this one. And then a reminder, and Tessa did a good job of explaining, we acquire these water rights. They're placed permanently in the Washington State Trust Water Rights Program that protects them in stream and for in-stream flow exclusively. And there's monitoring then both by us and Department of Fish and Wildlife sort of see that that water is in stream and see what benefit it has. And when that acquisition moves the water right in stream into the Trust Water Rights Program, that water right is deeded to ecology, and it's actually ecology's obligation through the water master to help ensure that no water is diverted under that water right in the future. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Got one right here in the chat. Ethan, do you have data for more than just 2015 for flows? One of your perspectives seems a little myopic. And that was just a comment in the chat.
Yeah, that's great, and we can provide some better sort of looking at not just sort of the worst case scenario, but looking at what some of the average years have looked like. Yes, we do have flow data for, I can't remember exactly when all the gauges went in, but we have flow data for not just 2015, but for since, the early 2000s on.
Thanks.
I've got a question. So if you're an upstream water right with a good water right, and you're a little bit downstream of that with a junior water right, if the upstream senior water right turns off to harvest or has a problem with the pump, whatever, then the junior water right can turn on and take that water. But if you take the water, buy the water from the senior water right, move it all the way down to the bottom of the stream and go past that junior water righter, then he's not allowed to share water anymore. Took his possibility of getting water away from him by moving downstream with the withdrawal point. So that's something I guess the ecology is looking at. I know they when I looked at moving points diversion on my stuff, they looked at that pretty hard.
Yeah, I can give a little context maybe, and if you have sort of more questions about sort of how that works, water rights are sort of definitely a complex sort of legal structure. When we acquire a water right under the Trust Water Program, we're limited the amount of water that ecology can enforce, the amount of water that ecology looks at the stream gauges and says, we need this amount of water to be here. And if it drops below this amount, we can ask that junior water rights are shut off in favor of that senior in-stream flow right. Is just the consumptive portion associated with the beneficial use of the senior in-stream flow right. So it has to pass the same 4-part test that includes the impairment consideration. Moving it to in-stream flow can't impair any senior water users.
Hey, Ethan, this is Joe. Now, can you just speak in general terms? The problem that it sounds like you're trying to solve here is the dry out that takes place in the extreme lower Teanaway at the half-mile mark. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. So yes, certainly we have our eye on, in the worst case scenarios, and we're seeing more often and expect to see more often, drought years like 2015 to occur. And so we're looking at, trying to have enough flow in those really bad drought years that there's access in and out of the Teanaway River system for fish to choose to move up it in search of colder water or to move out if they would like. The second, flow is still limiting the amount of available habitat in the lower Teanaway system, even during an average water year. And so by adding water back into that system, we're increasing available habitat even in non-drought years.
Yeah, I think what my question is trying to get down to is no matter whether every year there's dry out. I mean, it's a real problem if you've witnessed it. If you've witnessed it, that lower Teanaway, the area you're describing is problematic every year, whether it's completely eliminated fish passage or it's just become extremely warm. It's not a good situation, even in a normal runoff year. I guess my question is, no matter what year the water right is attributed to, or upstream or downstream, every year that's a problem. And since we're talking about a situation that is only a half mile up, it seems like almost the seniority of the water right is somewhat irrelevant in order to solve that problem of when and where the water rights are currently held.
Yeah. The way I kind of think about it is that so long as there is base flow above all the diversions, then acquiring any water right means you're going to stack water. You're going to have additional water. So base flow that everyone in the Teanaway who uses water has availability to use water, and we turn one off or acquire any water right. Exactly. We get extra water in that reach you're talking about. It challenge during a really, really bad drought year like 2015, because if you have a junior water right that is curtailed, that in-stream flow is also curtailed. And so sort of the floor at which the Teanaway can drop to before we sort of can work with ecology and say, we've acquired enough water that hadn't acquired it would be currently being used for irrigation, and that water is now in stream and protected. Acquiring senior water is really important to sort of building up that floor for the really, really bad drought years. But in general, acquiring water right of any priority date has value on the system.
Yeah, that answers my question. It does help every single year, regardless of what year the water right is attributed to.
Yeah, thank you.
Ethan, this is Jeff Bossman. I'm with Reclamation. Just as your records that you were looking for, we measured that site a couple times a year, and I don't know how far back, but it's went several years. I've stood in that very spot myself. And just for whatever it's worth, my understanding is if that goes below 10 CFS, those irrigators are supposed to stop irrigating on the spot. Whether they do or not, I don't know, but that's my understanding. So I don't know if that's worth anything, but I guess now you know. Maybe you already knew that.
No, thank you. Yeah, it gets it gets to the sort of question about how ecology enforces that. But yes, that's good context. Thank you.
What's the basis for that cap?
I don't know where it came from, to be honest with you.
I know where it came from. It actually has to be done by ecology. It was done in 2015. Stan Isley was the stream patrolman, and he looked at the conditions and talked to the fish folks, and I think Tim was like, okay, if it gets down to that, we better shut them down. So ecology had to tell each of the users that they had to shut off until they got down to that last one, which was actually already in press anyway. And then there's the time immemorial, right? So Stan kind of estimated what the time immemorial treaty right for fish probably was there, and nobody argued too strongly about it.
So is there a legal basis for any of that stand stuff?
No, there was a basis. I mean, the people went out and looked and consulted with the fish folks, which is what ecology is supposed to do.
Looking at it doesn't make it legal.
Now, what I'm saying, Doug, is that the stream patrolman who has the jurisdiction is supposed to work with reclamation and with SOAC, and without having a full-blown IFIM kind of study, they looked at it and just decided, yeah, there isn't water. I mean, you can see the pictures there. You might not be able to do a rigorous habitat analysis, but you can look at those pictures below the bridge and say, yeah, there's not enough water for fish.
To Doug's point, it was based on the time immemorial right for sufficient water to maintain fisheries that the tribe holds that's been batted around in the courts.
Right, for which there was not an assigned value for each place in the basin. It was left up to reclamation and SOAC to make that determination. It was just one of those hanging chads that the communication left out there for future generations to arm wrestle about.
Is that 10 CFS secure enough so that adding 2 more CFS somehow would get the 12 CFS that's needed for this riffle?
Don't know.
Hey, Ethan, and maybe your application gets into this. Can you clarify if those 8 landowners, are those new acquisitions, or are they temporary acquisitions going into permanent, or just some more details about the permanence and locations of those?
Yeah, we can provide sort of a map and a little bit more information in the full application. And like I said, I think we'll also sort of pull it back from sort of the 8 that we really would like to sort of that more reasonable set. Right now, it's a whole range. There's people in there who are actively irrigating. There's also people in there who we've had previous leases with, and there's also people in there who currently have their water donated in trusts. But there's nothing that stops them from taking the water out of trust and returning to irrigation, or if they were to sell property from a new landowner choosing to return to irrigation.
The comment here from Davey Lumley, member of the Citizens Committee. Pacific lamprey are also found within the Teanaway and would benefit from this as well. Adding them to your fish species list in your project goals may be helpful in reaching out to more people.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and I certainly appreciate that there's increased attention and focus on lamprey populations. So great, I might reach out to you to hear a little bit more about what we know about lamprey in the Teanaway.
I'll make a note and get you both connected. Any other questions?
Hey, Ethan, this is Luke. I might have missed it. What is the total ask from Surfboard, and what's the projected CFS it will secure?
Yeah, the only reason I sort of hedge on this, the total of those 8 opportunities is about 3.8 diverted CFS and about 2 consumptive CFS. I think I'd like to pare this back to be more reasonable for you guys in terms of what of those opportunities do we think has more assuredness of actually occurring within the time frame of funding here. What we're going to be working really hard in the next month or 2 here before the full application is due to have a better answer for you of what would the actual reasonable ask be and how much water is at play.
Thank you.
And your current ask is the 228,000 and change, right? And that assumes you could acquire all 8? Is that correct?
To double check that, I think we've included, the acquisition cost for all of them, and asked for 50% of the acquisition cost per year.
Yeah.
Any other questions on the Teanaway River acquisition?
Clear a little fog out of my head. Now, which creek that comes down Blue Path?
Swap.
Swat. Is that Swat all the way? Where's the Teanaway going to the river?
Upstream of Swap.
Just downriver from Cleellum. City of Cleellum.
So when you go up Highway 10, you go across it there somewhere.
Yeah,
Right when you leave the canyon and Play Allen Valley opens up.
Yeah. Right where the road connects, sort of. So Cleveland is, I think you guys can see my mouse. Cleveland is about here. Teanaway flows out and turns and comes into the Yakima, returns right about here.
We have 5 minutes left, so definitely time for more questions if there are any.
I would just ask, what's the current state of coho in the Teanaway? Are there active reintroductions going on? I know for a long time it was not one of the target streams, but I think I've seen Julian in there, so somebody put them in that probably. What, does anyone know the status of coho in the Teanaway?
I'm not sure.
That might be something worth, maybe shooting an email to Todd Newsom or others to put in the proposal just to clarify. Are they actively in there and what kinds of numbers?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. That we can definitely do that. The recovery plan, I believe, is what I pulled from, and I can reference back and find when that data came from, but it had reference that they had found a few adult coho entering and a few reds observed, but where those were, I can get the details on and see if there's any more current information.
Ethan, is there any public recreation or access impact either way?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Yes, would this project have any impact either way on public access or recreation?
I think there's value in that the public has in seeing the Teanaway River flow year round and have connectivity for aesthetics, for visitation. There is public access to the Teanaway River in that lower 11 miles. So putting water back in, there is benefit for the public to be able to have that increased flow. I think we're all familiar. There's a number of places in that lower section that are really popular recreation sites, in part because the flow is low and the water gets really warm and you've got that bedrock. So I think there would be benefits from sort of a recreation perspective of having additional flow in the river.
Thank you.
Do we know there's no bull trout there? It seems like it'd be prime habitat up north, or not north in the headwaters.
Last detected red was 05.
05.
Yeah.
Wow.
We know they were there, they were handled, genetic samples flipped, not a single one since.
Serious.
Yep. General assumption is, before all the work that this is a part of, between unscreened ditches and the low levels of the creek, that the migration to and from the Yakima River was more limited. Because the upper North Fork is beautiful.
And you probably know, Alex, has there been some discussion about possible reintroduction?
It is one of the candidate areas Yakima Nation is considering. Their preliminary focus is on Tainum Creek, and I would say Teanaway is right there behind it. But no dates or formal plans on the table at this point, unless something's happened in the last little bit.
No, that's summed it up pretty good. Probably time for just one quick question before we go to break, if there are any left. Well, thank you both, Ethan and Tessa. I appreciate you showing up today and telling us about your projects and taking part in the grant round.